about the CEDS, and we are recording, so that's very helpful. And just to let you know, Angie and Caroline and Erin, this is the group. This is the MEDA's EDD CRDC working group, and we have a call like this every other week, and we started doing this during the pandemic to make sure that we reconnected with each other and continued to share best practices. And we found so much benefit to doing this is that we thought that we're just going to continue to do this. And so we do it every week on different topics, and we thought that this would be a great opportunity to have you folks talk about the CEDS. And I know that was at your request, so we're excited about it. And we're all going through that same process in 2022 to re-up our CEDS. So I'm going to let in Kelly Sullivan. And Angie, can I turn it over to you maybe for some welcoming remarks, and then we can start the session?
Sure. Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting us to crash your party. And I would invite you to invite us anytime that it makes sense. You want to get an update. You want to include Erin, hear what's going on at EDA. We'd be happy to join you at any point. So good afternoon. Thanks again for having us. I just want to first give a shout out and let my colleagues introduce themselves real quickly. I see Caroline, of course, Erin, Daniel, and Steve, I think, on the line. So do you guys just want to say a quick hello?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for having us here. I see a lot of new and familiar faces and names on the list. So for those who don't know me, I'm Caroline Plant. I am the program officer for all of the Montana districts. So if you don't know me yet, you can reach out anytime.
Hi, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Actually, that was Erin, but Daniel, go ahead.
Oh.
And
Okay, I'll go ahead. I'm Daniel Cote, the program officer for Iowa, Missouri, and Colorado, Caroline's counterpart in those states for the partnership planning districts.
Hi, and I'm Steve Kastner. I'm a colleague with Erin. I'm kind of the behind the scenes support for him, and it kind of represents that while Erin is going to be your primary point of contact and represents the agency for your area, he has a big team of subject matter experts and help behind him to help carry the water for EDA for your assistance.
Thanks, Steve. I'm Erin Pratt. I'm the Deputy Economic Development Representative for EDA, serving Montana and Wyoming. Have been doing so since October, and proudly serving the state of Montana and Wyoming. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. And as you guys all know, Kurt Kaiser left us, and like all of our dream probably to retire early, and he was able to do that. And I know has been traveling and enjoying everything in Montana, beautiful Montana has to offer, and outdoor recreation in the winter months. So we were very fortunate to have recently invited Erin to join our team. Erin and Kirk worked really closely together to do outreach and to get Erin up to speed on EDA's programs. So when Kirk decided to retire, I don't think we've missed a beat. So Erin was able to have already had relationships with many of you, I would imagine, from his previous work with the governor. So you guys know him, and just very thankful that we still have EDR representation in Montana, and great service from Erin. So continue to reach out to him and connect with him as you did with Kirk. I don't want to take up too much time in my comments because I definitely want to hear from Barbara and Mary. I know it's a special opportunity to have them join this discussion as well. I did want to note that EDA has a budget now, past was signed by the president last week. We have increased our budget from $346 million to $373.5 million. And that's the 2022 budget. So as you know, we're halfway through the fiscal year already. We had a series of continuing resolutions, but we're really excited to have a full budget. And that's one thing that Erin will continue to work with you on, any projects. I know everything has really been focused on the American Rescue Plan Act, CARES Act before that, but we also have a regular budget, and certainly I'm sure that many of you guys have projects in your districts, in your regions that might be a good candidate for EDA funding. So please bring those to Erin's attention, and he'll be happy to work with you to get them through the process. With that, I was really hoping that we can just move through the agenda and then have some time for Q&A, because you guys may have some things that are on your minds that you'd like to talk about. And I would love to hear what those are and just have a dialogue with you on that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Erin, I think, to introduce the other speakers. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Angie. It is truly my great pleasure today to introduce Barb Wagner and Mary Craigel, both standard bearers in the work they do for the state of Montana, and just truly exceptional people. First, we'll hear from Barb Wagner, Chief Economist at the Montana Department of Labor and Industry, and truly the most respected and trusted voice when it comes to all facets of the Montana economy. Next, we'll hear from Mary Craigel, Bureau Chief with the Census and Information Center at the Montana Department of Commerce. Mary's been a part of countless research efforts across many state agencies, and recently led the team to deliver such a successful outcome for the Montana Census. So very grateful for all Mary's hard work in that regard. Proud to call them both friends, and grateful they've agreed to join us here today. So with that, I will turn it over to Barb.
Oops. Okay. Everybody can see my screen. Can I get a thumbs up from some people? All right, great. So what is on everyone's mind these days is about the worker shortage in Montana. I literally cannot even go to the bar without someone asking me about this. It's getting to be a real problem. So I just assumed that was what you guys were worried about as well. Montana has a very, very tight labor market. I will say the information that I'm presenting to you today has been changing quite rapidly. If I had given you this same presentation even a couple months ago, it would have had different conclusions. I will also say the information I'm going to share with you today is different in the state of Montana than it is nationally. Montana's economy and our economic recovery from the COVID pandemic recession was much more rapid than the nation as a whole. And so we have achieved full recovery in our labor force participation as much as we're probably going to get, whereas the nation is still struggling on that. So let me move forward with those caveats. So what everyone has been talking about in terms of labor force participation is what's shown on this slide, which is our labor force participation rate. This chart shows both Montana and the US, and it goes back to 1990. What this shows, the labor force participation rate shows how many people as a percentage of our total population are actively either working or looking for work. So kind of right now we're at 62% roughly. That means that 62% of Montana's population is currently either working or looking for work. Now, the biggest thing you notice here is the downward trend over the full-time line. That's mostly for the graying of our population and more people moving into retirement. So of the 40% or so who are not working, the majority of those are retirement age. We'll look at that data in just a few more slides. Zooming in only on Montana's labor force participation rate, let's take a look at what's happened in the recent past. First of all, up in right before the pandemic recession, we actually had an uptick in our labor force participation rates. We were having some slight wage growth entering into the pandemic. So when you look at our labor force participation rate at 62%, It does seem like it's pretty far down. It's about 1.5 points from this peak, but this peak was actually kind of a little bit above our trend. Our current labor force participation rates are not that far off trend. We have, as I've mentioned, continued to go down in the long run. When you zoom in and look at the labor force participation by age group, there's a different story. Every single age group of Montana workers has fully recovered their labor force participation rates from the pandemic. Now, this chart has the 65 and older is on this bottom chart. That's because in the retirement 65 and older population, they only have labor force participation of like 20. So I had to put it on a different chart so that you could see them both. So if looking at the 65 and older population, many of them do work, about 20%. That percentage is increasing slowly over time as our health improves and people continue to work later than 65, but they're fully recovered from the pandemic. The biggest group of workers and probably the most important to our economy are these 25 to 50, sorry, stuttered a little bit there, 54 years. That's our primary worker age, main working age population. Very high labor force participation at 85%. 60 to 65, this starts to go down because of early retirement, and those 25 and younger are typically lower because of two factors. One, they're in school, and two, they tend to be the lowest skilled and lowest experienced workers, and so they get lower wage rates as well. So their incentive to be in the labor market is a little less than the other populations. So of these, only the ones under 25 are still recovering from the pandemic recession. They're still down by about 0.5 percentage point, but you see they've made a pretty strong recovery. We're expecting them to fully recover. Also, this age group is typically the most likely to lag after a recession because of what I mentioned of facing the lowest wage levels already. And employers, when they start rehiring after a recession, typically go for the more experienced workers first. So backing up, I've just told you two things. First, I told you that our labor force participation rate is down since the pandemic, but then on this chart, I'm contradicting myself and I'm saying, hey, but look, everybody has fully recovered. What gives? Well, the truth of the matter is that it is not everybody has come back into the labor force except for the people who have retired. It turns out we've all gotten 2 years older during the last 2 years, sadly enough. And there's just a huge group of the baby boomer population that has moved into that retirement category. There's also people who have moved into that lower participation 55 to 65-year-old category. So there's been enough people who just naturally, not even early retirements, but naturally have aged up into the retirement age group and moved out of the labor force. Now, this is one of my favorite slides to show people because one, this retirement just shows up right away, right? This is showing why Montanans are not in the labor force by the reason that they give. It goes all the way back to 1994. What's really striking on this chart is, of course, the retirement and how much the number of Montanans retired have changed over time. But also what's striking is that these other categories of people, caring for family, school, disabled people, they really have not changed that much since the early 1990s. So while we talk about people who are, overall our labor force participation rates have gone down and people have changed in the popular press, this is often described as people not wanting to work or some other reason. And that's just not really shown at all in this data. In fact, given our population growth, you would think that there would be more people who are out for these reasons than what there was way back in, the late 90s, early 2000s. So that's a very striking chart, and I think different than what is explained in the popular press. Another category of people that we've been watching very closely during this pandemic recession is parents. It is absolutely true that both at Montana and nationally, parents had a really tough time during the pandemic because of the school closures and the daycare closures. And you see this dip in the labor force participation rates of all parents in Montana. Since then, they have recovered. Now in Montana, Parents are at the same labor force participation they were in the past. They're still working fewer hours because of a lack of childcare, but they're back working, which is good news. But here's the interesting thing, and we'll see this again on the next slide. The men have not necessarily recovered in the last 6 months when we've had a very, very strong economy, lots of job openings, huge amount of wage growth. Women, mothers have responded to that, and fathers have not at all. And we see that both in the level of parents, and also this chart shows Montana men versus Montana women. And women overall increased strongly and with their participation rates in the last 6 months in response to the strong economy. Men have not. Now, a couple other things to point out here, these two lines are getting closer, and a lot of that is about gender wage equality. You know, if you have children, then typically you take the higher paying family member to go continue to work, while the less earning family member, which is typically the female, stays home and takes care of the household and the kids a little bit more. So these two groups have been coming together partially because of more gender equality over time. I don't know, that doesn't necessarily explain why there's been this sharp decline across men and a sharp increase across women just in the last 6 months. It could be just a statistical problem. I see Mary has her hand up. She's going to ask some hard question of me.
Oh, this one's an easy one, Barb. So in terms of labor force, what's the split men versus women numbers wise?
Oh, that's a great question. So depends on the year, but about 48% of Montana's workers are female. That has in the past, in 2014, women were actually 52% of Montana's workers. So it does change year to year.
And that's about 500,000 workers, if I remember correctly. How many total overall?
So our total, it's about 550,000 at this point. So we'll have that number on a future slide. And oh, look at that. It's right here. So it is important in this entire discussion to remember that despite having lower labor force participation rates and having this declining among men, which we're keeping our eye on, there is more people employed in right now in the Montana economy and more workers involved in the Montana economy than there ever has been in the past. Some of this is due to migration. Some of this is just due to our population growing, but it is important to remember that this is really not like when we're talking about a worker shortage, we have more than we've ever had before. We're still short. Why is that? Well, now we're moving to the second part of it. Like any good economist, I have to talk about both the supply, which we've just discussed, and the demand for workers as well. Now, I'll just move straight into the demand. One of the reasons we have so many job openings is because Montana's economy has grown by a very large amount since before the pandemic. Now, this chart measures the quarterly real GDP. GDP is the measure of the value of all goods and services in the economy. So it's kind of an overall measure of how much the economy produces. And that this is real, so not adjusted for inflation. And in the third quarter, our GDP was 4% higher than the pre-recession peak. You can see the trend line that we were at. That's the orange line on this chart. And you can see that our growth exiting the recession was a lot higher than trend. So when we see all those job openings, part of it is due to this demand for greater workers because our economy is so much stronger. There's also been very, very strong wage growth in the last year and a half. The blue lines here are kind of the average wage. It's broken up into quarters. So it's basically taking the wage over the last 4 quarters. And then the orange line, which is shown on this orange axis on the right-hand side, is the percentage growth of annual wages over the prior year. So long story short on this graph is that in the past, our wage growth was about at 3.5% if you average this time frame before the pandemic. And all of a sudden the pandemic hits and we have these huge job losses, but what we also had is a huge amount of wage growth among the existing jobs. And when the employees were rehired back into their jobs, their wages were significantly higher. The wage growth over the last year has been about 8%. That's insanely high. I used to talk about how Montana had such really strong wage growth down in all of these years. We were one of the top growing states in the nation for our average annual wage. And then we hit this 8% and it really reset the entire scale. It's hard to really explain to people how much this is a big deal. Wages are important because it's how the economic growth really is passed to all members of society and not just concentrated under the capital owners. And it also really drives our future economic growth because wages that are spread out to the average Montana worker out there are going to fuel their consumption and fuel economic growth in the future. So, but with this high wage growth, it has also led workers to have a high level of quits. So this data shows the number of hires, layoffs, and quits in the Montana economy. And really we're focused on this yellow line of quits. And you've heard this nationally as to, I've heard it called the Great Resignation, but I actually prefer the name, the Great Reshuffling, because this isn't necessarily workers leaving the labor market, it's workers who are moving into higher paying jobs and moving up the career ladder. Now, this overall is going to be really great for the Montana economy because that reshuffling of workers, it puts workers into the most productive job for their skills, and that will make our economy more productive and it will lead to higher wages. But in the meantime, it leaves a lot of job openings. Now, just let me explain that. Let's say that if I, as the chief economist at the Department of Labor, took another job, that would be me leaving, but it leaves one opening, right? Well, we'll probably hire somebody else from the Department of Labor. That means that one of my workers would probably be promoted. Then it becomes quickly 2 openings and 2 people have quit and moved to a higher job. So there is a little bit of this snowball effect here. And as we're just moving through this readjustment period, the level of quits have been accelerating. And so that just, makes it seem as though we have a lot more job openings than what we really have. The level of job openings per employed person has increased. So that the demand for workers is a lot of the reason why the Montana economy is experiencing such tight labor markets right now. And I think that that's a part of this labor market that a lot of people don't really think about. I also want to mention a couple other things. They're also not necessarily in February because our COVID case counts have been low. There's also been high worker absenteeism because of COVID cases. If you have been exposed to COVID or have COVID or had COVID in your family, you typically have to stay home, and that's more than what we've had in the past in terms of like sick leave. So then that makes employers need to overhire so they can cover the excess sick leave. So it also takes worker hours out of the economy because they're staying home sick. And then finally, productivity has been a really interesting measure to watch in the last 2 years because productivity really spiked as workers went remote. And then it fell again as workers moved back into the office. It turns out that remote work actually did make most workers more productive. There's lots of discussions on why, and I don't think it's been fully, researched as much as it could be. But that level of productivity, as it fell, that means that we need more workers to produce the same level of stuff. The best way to explain productivity with remote work in Montana is one of my friends runs an engineering firm out of Great Falls. And normally before the pandemic, he would drive all over the state to meet with his clients, of course. And so he spent a lot of hours in his car just driving around. But during the pandemic, all those meetings were held remotely. He can go instantaneously from meeting to meeting to meeting. He can handle 8 different meetings a day instead of 1 meeting and then drive 8 hours a day. So in Montana, we kind of get why we could have higher productivity because of the distance that we're driving to meet with our clients and business contacts. But that is actually true across the whole nation as well. So I think we've covered all of those things. Both these supply factors and these demand factors have resulted in an extremely low unemployment rate, 2.7% is a record low for the state of Montana. This shows, this slide shows the unemployment rate in blue and on the left-hand side. And then the number of unemployed people is also kind of mind-blowing because, and that's shown in gray and on the right-hand side. So right now we have about 15,000 people in the entire state of Montana who do not have a job and are looking. That's roughly the same level of unemployed people that we had in 2007 when labor markets were tight and actually during our bubble economy. And if you think about the amount of population growth that we've had since that time, it's kind of a little bit, you know, it really is, that's a very few unemployed people out there. So, it's important to remember that those who are currently unemployed are likely people who probably have some sort of seasonal job. They have multiple barriers to work. They also are likely to be people who are living outside the urban areas, like they might be living in a rural area and well, different from where a lot of the jobs are. And that means that they probably could be accessed through a remote worker agreement, but they might not be living in the same like worker region as where the jobs are. So there's a disconnect between where people live and where people work. And that's not necessarily one that is easy to remedy. So I'm just putting this slide up here again, because if there's anything I want you to take away, it is this one slide. It is also true that if you are looking for people outside the labor force, you're going to have to look into these populations of people. For example, there are some efforts here in Helena to engage retired people into the workforce. I have one great story from the Capital City Sports Club here in Helena, who is hiring retired people and telling them they can come in for any amount of time at any time they want, work for however long they want, and then just like let them know how many hours they have. And so they have this team of like 10 retired people who just, you know, they need to take 2 months off to travel. Great, come back when you're here. And by having this flexible work arrangement with enough retired people, you manage to have enough cleaners at your gym for the whole time because you can just be flexible about their scheduling. So that one other last thing, this is kind of just a summary slide of where to find more workers. But one thing to mention that in the year of 2024, retirements in the state of Montana start to slow, and it'll be the first time. So since about 2010, there's been more retirements in Montana than there has been young people entering the labor force. So our labor force, other than in migration, has been like shrinking slowly. So, and with migration, just keeping it at the level we need to have jobs. But in 2024, that starts to change. The number of young people entering will be more than the number of retirements again. And so our labor force will start to loosen up again. All of the charts, most of the charts that I've shown here today are on our job tracking dashboard. Here's the website, and then you click on this Finding Workers button. And then down here at the bottom, you can track the labor force participation rates that we've been talking about, talk what's happening with parents, which has been a big thing, and kind of looking at all of these other data. You can break down this not looking for work by different age groups and different demographic groups as well. So that's all I have for you today. You can give everybody a chance to write down that website. Okay, that's it. Mary, you're up.
Guess I have to unmute myself. Hi, everybody. So I'm actually going to talk about something entirely different, but that's totally CEDS related. The really good news is that Barb Wagner is involved in this project too. So you, as usual, you get the two of us. We seem to collaborate a lot. So what I'm actually going to talk about is a fantastic EDA planning grant that all the great folks at EDA we got the money for first. Then I'll give you a very, very 2-second update on Census, and that'll be pretty much it. And so in December of 2021, the Montana Department of Commerce, we were awarded $1 million to develop an online planning tool. And so this is specifically aimed at CEDS planning and land use planning and growth planning for every community in Montana. The timeline for getting this done is 30 months, and I can happily report we are making great progress. Welcome to Snowflake. So what is Snowflake? Snowflake is a cloud-based platform that, unlike other databases, it does not require exporting, normalization, indexing. You can just create a view right into the data table, pull out the variables and values you need. So why does that matter? Well, because that's been one of the hard things about always sharing in state government, has been that everybody had their own databases. They didn't talk to each other. They're really difficult to standardize. So this is a way that we've been able to do this without having to go down that full path. Equally cool, it's a Bozeman company. So Snowflake actually started in California, and they moved their company headquarters to Bozeman. They're one of the fastest growing tech companies around. They have clients all over the globe. They did a ton of work during COVID on infection tracking. They did the entire state of California, and I can tell you they've been wonderful to work with. And so the good news is we're making lots of progress. So let's go into a little detail about this project. So right now we're in step 1, which is identifying all the existing data that is available across state government that's related to growth planning, land use, community planning, etc. That's my shop is leading that, but I've reached out across state government. We have lots of folks that are helping to compile this information. Step 2, so the kinds of information we'll be including are things that are already up on our website. They're up on the website that Barb shared. So this, from our shop, it'll be all the population data, all the housing data. So demographic data, how many housing units by all the way down to the lowest geography. For Barb's area, it'll be all those unemployment rates, all that job creation information that she just shared. We'll be joining together. We've reached out to the OBPP, who is now doing ARPA funding reporting in Snowflake, but they're looking at moving some of their other reports out as well. There's some other agencies, and I'll get to that in a minute. But so from our shop, we'll be doing both the population housing, but also the tourism data. So this is already up on our site. But again, the problem has always been, yeah, it's on our site, but why wouldn't it be nice if we had one site platform that you economic developers could just go and get it all? That's what we're working on. The second step, so we're compiling the data. The second step is to actually go out and talk to all of you. I am finishing up the RFP right this week to engage. It's got to be out by April 1st. To engage a communications company who is going to go out and both survey all of you about, what do you need to do this kind of work for your CEDS. I have most of the CEDS plans for all the CRDCs and lots of counties, but just because I have them doesn't mean I know everything we need to know for sure. So this is, again, this tool is built for you. So we want to engage you right from the start, and we want to keep you engaged. So not only will the communications group that we hire survey everybody, talk to folks, but they're also going to be in charge of the ongoing communications through the lifetime of this project. So not only do you get involved at the front, but we keep you involved all the way through. Step 3, which will start sometime in the summer, is actually building the platform. However, we've already got this done. Thanks to the great work of Adam Carpenter over at Department of Administration, who is the new Chief Data Officer, my dear friend Barb Wagner and her staff, and my fantastic staff here at Commerce. We have the platform, Snowflake platform, up. We have data in the platform that DLI can see. We are already adding more and more data. So this piece of building the platform is already well underway. The part that needs to still happen is the tools. So the idea is with this platform, and again, I want you guys to envision something more of a Dodge Dart version than a Cadillac version, because we're going to start small with only a few parameters, a few things, test it out, work with it, make sure it works out. So think maybe population might have population forecast, and you out in the field then could change the parameters a little bit, make it higher, make it lower. I don't know exactly what variables, but there's going to be an ability again for the communities themselves to get all this data, but then also have some tools available to work with the data, look at what different trends might be. Like, Barb just said with the labor force, what if you got half of those retirees to come back into the labor force? What would that mean? And again, I don't know which projections we're going to be able to put, but we're going to put some up there initially and make sure that we are doing it with you as partners the whole time. Step 4 is this other data products. So that's, again, housing models, projection models, other trends. Barb and I have already talked about some ideas on how we can get this done. And again, that's the lifetime of the project goes till really September of next year. But we're going to work on this starting now and all the way through the process. Step 5, as I mentioned, is simultaneous to step 2. This is a communication plan with all of you that explains what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, what makes you part of the work that we're doing from the whole time, keeps you up to date, figures out how we can test, retest, try out the tools, and that, again, this will be through an RFP with the consultant that will be out by April 1st. And finally, step 6 is just at the very end of the project, we will, and all the way along, we'll look for projects that we can actually test this out. Is this working? So we will not only look at some growth plans, make sure you guys have the data you want, that it's working together, but we will also try this on a couple of projects that we are working at here in Commerce with the Industry Development Group that Tom Kazurski heads up. One of them might be Jim Atchison's project that we talked about today, which I know he's working on. A couple of our requests for information, requests for proposals. Those are the kinds of projects that we are going to target to help see if, is this working? Does this tool do what we need it to do? All right, so as I mentioned already, we're already making great progress. So I would say that in the history of the state, I don't know any database platform that got, or any software platform that got put up and is now working within a month. Again, thank you to Department of Administration, to SITSD, and especially to Barb and her team. So we've paid for the license. I signed the check today. That's what this EDA grant did. Here's all the agencies that already have projects that they're working on in Snowflake. So for example, the Department of Livestock is putting all the branding information up in Snowflake, and then they will use it to help guide the inspections. I know that matters to lots of you folks, that's been a really tedious process, that it's been really paper intensive. Labor and Industry, they're co-working with us on the data elements. Corrections, I just got a call from them, or a note from them. They're actually working on a project. Justice is working on a project. Health and Human Service. So this, again, all this data that's always been siloed across these agencies, we're starting to try these projects to try to bring things together. We have an IT plan in place. In fact, Barb and I just got off that call right before this one, and she and I are both on another call at 1 to keep this thing moving. And it's, like I said, we're way ahead. And then the RFP to hire the consultant. I'm going to pause a minute, see if anybody's got questions. I'm sure you do. Probably best, if you want, you can always just send me an email, mary.craigel@mt.gov. But you're going to get calls because you're going to get consultants that are reaching out to you to help make this happen. And I would strongly, it'd be great if all you guys would really participate as much as you can, because this is for you. This project needs to be for you. It needs to work for you. And so, like I said, hopefully from CEDS here on out, instead of digging around hunting for data, you go to one source, here it is. You can actually even play with the data yourself. So given that, I wanted to give you a quick update on the census. I wanted you to point out what the gas price was. We did this sign. Dang it.
Mary, can I interject one quick question?
Sure, absolutely, Jim.
Will your slides be available, the ones you just shared?
They will. I actually already sent them to Erin, so Erin has them.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yep. Yep. And I can put
And
them up on our website.
Mary, this is Angie. I was curious if you guys are going to do training on how to use the tool once it's ready.
Somewhere in here that yes, we are. I thought it said actually should have said training, but yeah, that's kind of ongoing as the development happens. But part of this communications plan is to include training. Whether we're doing the training, I don't know who's doing the training, but if the consultant will do the training or we'll do the training. The other group that's heavily involved from Commerce is CDD, who of course has the CTAP planning group staff. And they are guiding all this project as well. Renee Lemon is the division administrator there now. And it's Renee and I are working on leading, managing this project. Oops. Any other questions before I move on? Great. So as many of you heard this past week, there was a national undercount in the census in some of the key areas. The one that we're most disturbed about is the American Indian count. So what are we doing about it? So there's only one process that allows you to address that, and that is through CQR, which is called Census Question Resolution. Problem with that is you can only address it for housing units. You can't actually address it for population. So a number of individuals, including me, because I am now actually the chair of the state data center, is writing to the population group asking them to allow modifications based on what this known undercount is. It's 5.6% nationwide for American Indians. We don't know yet what it is for Montana, but I suspect it could be much, even higher than that. We'll actually never know. They will tell us what our undercount was overall for our population, but they will not break it down into race. So we won't have that information, but we can go back and look at it and estimate. So again, we are trying to get that adjusted so they add that percentage back in. And the reason you guys care is because about $3 billion a year comes into Montana based on census counts, census data. And so if there's a formula that has a 5.6% is too low for a tribal population or a Hispanic population, I think they're, yeah, you can see they're even more. It's going to be a real problem for the funding because there just won't be enough funding. Plus, in terms of planning, if without solid good numbers, everybody makes poor plans. And so our shop is working on that, and as well as the CQR process. You'll hear from me about that later on in other calls and other times, but I just wanted to hit that real close. The third question I've gotten, and this is the last group, is, well, how bad is the data? So because of that undercount, as well as what's called differential privacy, where they added statistical noise into the data, this is a quick chart to show you how good the data is. And so I just want to point out this, that populations under 100 by race alone, by county, are crap. They're just not, they're not reliable, and anything at the block level is completely unreliable. We can help you figure out what to use. The ACS data is still there from 2019. The 5-year ACS data just came out this week. There's other sources. And so our shop, and I know Barb shop too, is with her great group, is just is able to think about data and think about solutions and not just focus on the problem. But I wanted you guys to be aware of this. Upcoming results, again, I mentioned the what the undercount is for Montana, that will be out this May. In terms of the demographic files, like the race file, the age files, gender files, we still don't have a date from the Census Bureau. They're saying end of the year tentatively, but we don't know. That's it.
Hey, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
So for those of us who work in Indian country and those of us who work in rural Montana, wow, that doesn't provide me with a lot of comfort with regard to the numbers from the census. Is there anything we could or should be doing to help you get the right numbers at this point, or is it water under the bridge and we're going to have to live with this for the next 10 years?
So I actually, the answer is kinda. So here's the answer. So the CQR process, we actually have, I'm trying to get this to not, yeah, okay, there we go. Thank you. We're trying to, through CQR, which is again, the census count resolution, is to go back and look at areas that we know that there were significant problems. So one of the ways that we've done that, we've identified all the places where population went up, but housing units went down, because again, we can contest housing units. And that, I actually have a slide for that, but that's actually a really significant number of places in the state. So that's a place that folks can help, because what we're going to do is put those together and then reach back out to the local jurisdiction, whether it's a city or a city, a tribe, a county. It has to be, the jurisdiction has to be the one that complains. We can't complain on your behalf, but we can partner with you in complaining and help you develop your help develop your the information you need to present, which actually is fairly complicated. Unfortunately, right? Of course it is. And so, but not unachievable, but difficult. And they don't tend to like to do that. So I'm just going to share this screen really super quick. So this you can see, so this is housing unit changes where the housing units went down, but you can see populations went up in the same areas. So that's a problem, right? I mean, yeah, anyway, so for some reason I'm not getting my not share button. So if somebody can share, Paul, if you can go back and share your screen again, that'd be great. So number one, we'll be sending out materials in that regard. The second way is to, join me with writing letters. So let's write letters to the population division. Karen Battle is her name. I can send out that information. I will also can provide a copy of the letter that we're sending. Write the congressional delegation. I don't, yeah. People, there's always this sad disconnect between all the census stuff and what really happens on the ground. And especially what my huge concern is for rural and for reservation areas is the funding side. And what does that mean? It's just really problematic, and how they're going to draw stuff going forward with the wrong kinds of boundaries. Everything from our friends over at the legislature, the reapportionment and redistricting commission, to the PSC commission, to everybody else. I mean, these numbers have some problems, and unless there's a population well over 100, it's a real problem. So that's my two suggestions.
Well, on that score, Mary, I think you're preaching to the choir. We well understand the importance of the census numbers as it relates to money on the ground in our communities, and for rural Montana, particularly for rural Montana that has a high Native American population, it's dollars on the ground here. So please share with us whatever you feel comfortable sharing that we can move the needle with our congressional delegation or others to get an accurate count.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I'm now the chair of the state data centers. So there's actually 60 different state data centers because it covers the territories and some other groups. And there's also a whole 2 other big partners, and all of us together across the entire United States, plus across all of the ethnic groups. So there's like ones for the CICs, the communities of interest. So Asian, Native American, African American, Black, all have their other groups. We're all writing letters. And so we'll see. But traditionally, the census, this has been a problem where, you know, it's kind of, oh, we already did this after the fact. Now you got to undo it. The new head of the census is probably one of the most respected directors they've ever had. He actually was the president of the American Statistical Association, and he is Hispanic. And so as a result, he is more sensitive to this issue and this problem. He's basically come out and said, well, no, the census data that we gathered was reliable, but he hasn't really said that the census data they're reporting is reliable, which is very interesting. So we'll see how it all works out. Barb's smiling.
An important
Mary?
nuance.
Erin.
Thanks, Paul. So I just wanted to thank Barb and Mary, and Barb for that. I wrote down myth busting, truth telling, and soothsaying as the takeaways from her, and Mary for this amazing new tool that my mind is spinning on the applications for that, and so appreciate your hard work on behalf of all Montanans to kind of get this census right. And I know it's been a huge lift from day one, so I want to thank you for that. And then with your blessing, Paul, I think we can turn it over to our CEDS team to kind of get those questions answered. We want to make sure we keep enough time to answer those specific CEDS related questions for the people on the call. So I'll turn it to you, Paul, and we'll send it to the rest of our team.
You bet. And so are there other presentations or pronouncements relative to the CEDS from the EDA that we need to be aware of on this call, Erin or Angie or Caroline?
I just
I
have
think
a
we're just going to
couple
open it up
notes.
to.
Hey, Paul, this is Mary real quick. I'm going to jump off. So if you want to continue recording, you'll have to turn the recording back on, I think. So I'll go ahead and stop it.
Okay.